presenting.
Have two more coming up. Next week we'll talk about rapid assessment guidelines, and then finally rapid response. This all is really a reflection of the work I've done over the past 34 years in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and finally with the U.S. Geological Survey with Annie Simpson and Bill Gregg and Sharon Gross and lots of other good people in the USGS. I worked with them from 2000 until 2012. And so we also have something I'd like for you to look, you might want to tune into coming up. Steve and I did a workshop in Tanzania, Africa, for port of entry officials in 2006, and so we're turning that into a webinar series here on IVS, or invasive species prevention. And so we started it last week. This Thursday we'll have the next the number 2 webinar in that series, an introduction to invasive species with their impacts and pathways of spread. That's coming up the day after tomorrow. As Steve said, he has a list of webinars on IPC Web Solutions. Just go to his website, and he's got a number of videos where he records these webinars we do. And the 3 that I've recorded so far are the first one and the second one. Also, we did a brief recording of the 7 steps for developing EDRR capacity, just the general outline of what we're trying to accomplish here. And I just want to encourage you as we're going through our webinar today to think about the smart tools that are available now through this company. And if you're doing inventory or project planning or control projects, or you're wanting to start early detection, rapid response systems at the local or state or even national level, we have tools that can help guide you through that process. So they're all listed on the IPC website as well. So today we're going to be talking about early detection, data management, and reporting. And before we do, I just want to say welcome to the folks who have been with us for this is our 3rd webinar together. Some of those folks include Cynthia Riskin from Seattle, John Throop from Michigan, Adam Throckmorton from the National Park Service in Missouri, Aaron Vinnie Vollrath from Wisconsin, Julie Sanderson from Wenatchee in Washington, Suzanne Roberts from the Massachusetts DEP, Bonnie Eyestone from the Quinault Indian Nation in Washington State, and Robert Taylor from the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. We also have some new folks visiting with us participating, Pam Fuller and Annie Simpson, who I used to work with in the USGS. Very nice to have both of you today to take the time out. And finally, Travis Ganter from Fort Drum, New York. And Steve tells me that Georgia Bourne from Mexico City has joined us as well. So we have at least 13 folks, and if there's anybody else that has joined in the last day that was not on the list I got from Steve, I'd like to welcome you all to this. I got to tell you, in working on weed eradication projects over the past 30-plus years, the one thing that is the critical link that is often missing is any way to find something soon enough so that you can take action. And that is exactly what has happened to us even right here at Lake Waccamaw when we found hydrilla last fall. And we have 600 acres of it now, and it's going to cost at least $450,000 a year to deal with this, because we can't use the sterile grass carp in that lake because the Wildlife Resources Commission just will not give a permit in a natural lake with endemic species like the Waccamaw silverside. So we have to use chemicals, and so it's going to cost a lot of money. And so as we're going through the day, I often think about, it would have been so simple whenever that boat came here 3 or 4 years ago, if we had really been paying close enough attention, that we could have just simply picked that stuff up out of the water and that would be it. And so now, of course, everybody here in this area has true religion when it comes to preventing these kinds of things, because now they've got to come up with $250,000 per year to match what the state is willing to put in there. And so there's a real need. Whatever else we do, I think that, to me, weed control is simple compared when you know when it's there and you're going to go out and do something about it. It's pretty straightforward. But if you don't know it's there, this is really what we want to talk about today. So to set the stage for this, I want to just, especially for the folks who have not seen my webinars before or my presentations on EDRR, we have divided EDR up into 3 different categories, with EDRR 1.0, which is national and state level programs for federal and state noxious weeds, basically regulated species. That really began with the witchweed eradication program here in 1957 in the Carolinas, and later when I came along back in the early 80s, we started working on other projects like goat shrew in Utah and Japanese dodder in South Carolina. These are regulated species. Then we go to EDRR 2.0, in which I started working with Bill Gregg and the U.S. Geological Survey in the late 90s to develop state partnerships, interagency approaches to EDRR. And so that is when we helped them to establish the Delaware Invasive Species Council. And then in the early 2000s, we started developing task forces like the Carolina Species Phytex Task Force and the Giant Salvinia Task Force here in North Carolina. So EDRR 2.0 is an interagency approach to this thing. So this last approach that we're really going to focus on today is called EDRR 3.0. We call it the landscape approach to EDRR. Basically, we're trying to get people at every level of the landscape, from the nation all the way down to your backyard. Whether you're in a national park, state park, you're at Lake Waccamaw, or whether it's even on your backyard, people need to take responsibility for the land they own or manage, and that is what this is all about. It sort of follows the Otto Leopold concept of land conservation. Basically, take responsibility for your own land, or the land that you manage, and that's really what this is about today. It is not something new. This is what our parents and grandparents used to do farming before World War II, when they would go out there and deal with these problems before they got to be too big. And so now with economic weed control, with herbicides, we've sort of become lackadaisical about new species or low levels of populations of weeds. And so we're seeing the effects of that in a lot more new weeds. And before I launch into it, I just want to say one more time, if you haven't heard this before, Rod Randall from Western Australia has documented 33,759 weeds around the world so far. About 10 years ago, when he started the Global Compendium of Weeds, he had 22,000 species. So he's added 10,000 species in 10 years. I don't know how many he's going to end up with in the next 20 years, but who knows. But of that total, folks, we have in our country just about 1,300 species. So I want you to bear in mind this as I'm talking today, and it is why I am so committed to this. It's not enough for me to work and retire and sit back and watch this, because we have so much to do to develop the kind of EDRR capacity we need to make sure that another 30,000 weeds don't come here. So just imagine 30,000 more plants like kudzu and oriental bittersweet. And that is what we're faced with unless we do something. And that is why I've chosen to work with individual landowners, because we're going to have national programs, state programs, maybe county programs, but we really want to work with landowners and land managers. And that's what today is about. How do you do that? So where do you fit in this picture? So the 7 steps are to get organized, put more eyes on the ground, look around, do field surveys, manage your field data, tell somebody, assess the problem, and take action. This is the 7 steps we're talking about to develop EDRR capacity. The ones we're going to go into detail today are really about early detection. It's number 2 through number 5. Put more eyes on the ground, look around, manage your field data, and tell somebody. So we're going to jump ahead to developing that early detection network. And this is the one thing that I've been working with groups like the Delaware Invasive Species Council in North Carolina, EPSI, South Carolina, EPSI, etc., for a long time to try to figure out how to get an early detection network. And so whatever land unit you're talking about, whether it is North Carolina, it is Columbus County, North Carolina, whether it is Lake Waccamaw in North Carolina, or whether it's a national park, a state park, or your own farm, we got to figure out who's out there that can expand your ability to find something early. So we're talking about volunteers, Friends of Parks, Native Plant Society members, agency field personnel, and employees. And at Lake Waccamaw, we've got a number of very dedicated folks who live there, such as John McNeil there in the middle. He's a lifelong resident, about 85 years old, has a house on the lake, and he's one of those kind of people that will keep his eyes open for you. If you can find a person like that on the land unit you're trying to manage. This is Grant Egley. Grant Egley is important. He was one of the original scientists here at the Whiteville USDA Research Center in about 1960. He is the one who actually discovered that ethylene will cause suicidal germination of witchweed. So he and Dr. Epley were living and working here at this research station in the 1960s. And Dr. Epley came in 1965 after he finished his doctorate at NC State. And so in the late 60s, Dr. Egley did this research and found out that they could, cause suicidal germination of witchweed seeds, those tiny microscopic seeds in the soil. And then Dr. Epley built the equipment to actually inject it into the soil. So it's really this very successful program which is really about rapid response as well, eliminated over 430,000 acres of witchweed from in the coastal plain of both Carolinas here, is a tribute to this man and to Dr. Bob Epley, who just died, in terms of equipment development and basic research. So once you find something like witchweed or hydrilla, you really need those folks out there helping you. In the case of witchweed, what they do is, since it's a crop pest and they have money, and they're talking about multiple land units in many counties in both Carolinas, they actually have field surveyors that they employ in the summertime to go out and look for it. That is not going to happen very much unless you have a federal or state funded program somewhere. And most of the time you're going to have these folks who have a vested interest in the land unit that you own or manage, that they're going to be out there to help you, like Friends of Parks, like John McNeil or Grant Egley. And Grant now is retired. He's about 82 years old. He lives at the lake, and he's in better shape than most people I've ever seen in my life. He can still run the 15-mile Take the Lake run every 4th of July. Does just really great. So you want to get these folks together and conduct early detection training workshops once you figure out who they are. In the case of Lake Waccamaw, what we're going to start over the next couple of months before we start the control program and eradication program in May and June, we're going to bring all of our residents together who love to go out on that lake. It's a 9,000-acre lake, and we're going to train them how to find hydrilla, first of all. And we're also going to train them to look for other things like crested floating heart. And if you've never seen this plant, crested floating heart, it's like a white water lily floating plant, and it was been a problem in South Florida for probably 10 years, as Pam Fuller will attest. And I'm not sure how it got to South Carolina, but it probably was brought there on a boat, or it could have been planted there and just spread from somebody's water garden. So anyway, we want to make sure that people at Lake Waccamaw know about these high-risk plants that are spread, especially by boats. So we're going to have early detection training workshops. And if that's the kind of thing that you're thinking about doing for your clients or for your partners for the land units that you work with, then we'd be happy to help you design some training workshops specifically that would be for the folks that you work with there. The really important thing you got to do once you get these people identified, once you train them, is to stay in touch with them. And so what we'll be doing here is developing an early detection network listserv so that we can give information to these folks at Lake Waccamaw. And then we'll send out weed alerts if we find something. If, like I said, the difference is if we had done this 4 or 5 years ago here in southeastern North Carolina, we wouldn't have this 600-acre infestation right here. We've documented at least 600 acres right here in the northeast quadrant of the lake. And so whenever we do find something, we're going to work really hard to make sure it never gets this big. Send out weed alerts. The next step is to do these periodic surveys. And in this case, every year, we're going to send out folks around the lake to do an intensive survey. So last fall, North Carolina State University came when we first found hydrilla and did a sonar survey of the lake bottom to actually document what was there. If you don't have a sonar survey in a lake, you put a rake head on the end of a rope and throw it out there, and you can find anything that's growing on the bottom and pull it up. And that's basically how we figured out we had about 600 acres. And then the sonar survey actually documented that in early November. So you want to survey your managed resources, whatever you are trying to protect or manage there, and your natural resources like lakes and streams, natural areas, hiking trails, that kind of thing right there. Now, if you're working in the witchweed eradication program here in the Carolinas, we had developed a number of survey methods when I worked for Dr. Bob Epley here at the Whiteville Center back in the early 80s. Detection surveys, we have done those as walking surveys. This is Greg Abbott. He was a witchweed officer, witchweed program officer here in the late 80s, who now lives in southern Utah and works for APHIS out there. I'm surprised he hasn't retired yet. Then we have platform surveys so that we would be able to put surveyors up above the crops to look down into them rather than through them. And we also did horseback survey, which works pretty well too. And then we did also, before they closed the lab in 1995, we were beginning to figure out how to train dogs to go out in the fields to look for witchweed, but they closed the lab down before we could actually complete that project. So you do detection surveys, then delimiting surveys, figure out how much is there, and in the case of Lake Waccamaw, we actually use the sonar survey to figure out what is there, where it is, and so about how much it's going to cost. Finally, after you finish your control work, you go back and see how effective it was. And so in terms of specific survey methods, as I said, we used a whole lake sonar survey to map the entire lake bottom. It took about 3 days going back and forth in these swaths that were like 20 feet wide across that lake. Now, if you're dealing with large land units like national parks, I won't go into many details here, but Utah State University has developed general survey methods for large land units like wildland weed survey with parallel swaths, contour swaths, digital aerial sketch mapping with aircraft. You can find these things pretty readily, but to help you cover a much larger area. Once you figure out what you have out there, what I suggest you do is archive it somewhere. And a lot of the people we work with now are archiving their information in the University of Georgia EDMAP system. This is Early Detection, Distribution, and Mapping System. Now, you can do that, as I've always done it until recently, by going out with a GPS unit and a clipboard with the form that they have right there in their system, and write the information down and come back in your office and make sure you have an EDMAPS account. Put the information in along with your images, and you've got a field data point right there, and it will show up on their maps as a new record of a particular invasive plant somewhere, wherever you are. And so what has changed, though, that I really like are these phone apps. And our children use these phones for the last 8 or 10 years, our sons. They were texting long before I was ever interested in it. And then they got me hooked on it when I figured out that I could actually use this phone, which I got the app from Florida, to actually submit information to EdMaps directly from your phone. Now, that was actually created for Florida. And so the one that I'm using right now, though, because we're in the Southeast, is Southeastern Early Detection Network. So you have all these phone apps for different regions of the country, such as the Mid-Atlantic Early Detection Network. In fact, they have developed one for eye pain for the Northeast, which is going to be really good. Once you get your information and you put it where you want it, then you start thinking about project planning. This is where I'd like for you to look at the tools that Steve Manning and Lee Patrick and Chuck Bargeron have actually created for the company, and that is IPC Prevent for developing early detection systems, IPC Project Plans, IPC Project, IPC Inventory, and Logic. And IPC Logic is pretty neat because it can actually help you figure out what kind of control methods you need for a particular site, for a particular invasive plant. Now, once you get your information in, and if you think you've got something new in the state, regardless of whether it's new in your land or not, if you think it's new in the state, for example, if we ever get crested floating heart here, I'll tell you the second person that's going to know if I have anything to do with it is Rick Iverson in Raleigh. Rick is he's our state weed coordinator for the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. He was the one who actually called us last May and said, we have Kogon grass. Okay, come up here to Pender County, which is east of here, and we need to do an assessment, a field assessment, to figure out what to do. The reason that was important, and it was the first time Kogon grass had ever been found in North Carolina and documented. We know it's in South Carolina. We know that it has been found in Virginia. But this was the first time it had ever been found in North Carolina. So anyway, if it's a confirmed state noxious weed or a federal noxious weed like Kogon grass, you definitely need to call somebody like Rick Iverson. So what I want you to do in terms of the 7 steps in just closing this out so that we might actually have a few minutes is for you to get organized, put more eyes on the ground, look around, submit field data, manage your field data, report it, assess it, and make a plan to actually do something about it. And so today we've covered early detection, data management, and reporting. And so next Tuesday we're going to talk about rapid assessment. And in that particular webinar we'll cover the general rapid assessment system that I developed for just general assessments. Then there's one that APHIS has developed for prohibited listing systems. And the other one that I really like is the Australian Quarantine Inspection System. They have a weed risk assessment process that's really easy to use. You can do this kind of work by yourself by reading a lot and by getting people organized through in-house programs with volunteers or dedicated staff, or you can outsource it. And in that case, we'd love to work with you to set up some kind of early detection system on lands that you own or manage. So I want you to look at it one more time and think about the landscape approach to EDRR, what we really have to develop if we're going to stop the inflow and establishment and spread of these 30,000 weeds we don't already have. 30,000. it just sort of makes me shudder to think that there's 30,000 more out there we don't even have. So I hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is going to be day after tomorrow, for the invasive species prevention webinar on an introduction to invasive species with their ecological and economic impacts and pathways of spread. And please, if you missed any of our webinars in this series before today, you can look at the ones we have recorded that are on the IPC outreach page of the IPC website. And with that, Steve, I'm going to turn it back over to you and tell you that I appreciate all of the work that you all are doing to prevent the establishment and spread of invasive plants.
Thanks, Randy. I also encourage everyone to join us tomorrow for John Peter Thompson's presentation. I think it's going to be a fun look at the history of kudzu. Kind of a unique look at it, and a unique perspective coming from John Peter. That's at 12 Eastern Time tomorrow. So thanks, everyone, for coming today, and look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good day.